The United States Secretary of State says that there will be a smooth transition to a second Trump administration. Mike Pompeo was responding, and it's unclear whether he was joking, to a question from a journalist regarding what preparations the State Department had undertaken to engage with the transition team of President-elect Joe Biden, and at what point any delays in recognizing the outcome of the election would hamper national security.
There will be a smooth transition to a second Trump administration. Right? We're ready. The world is watching what's taking place here. We're going to count all the votes. When the process is complete, there'll be electors selected. There's a process. The Constitution lays it out pretty clearly. The world should have every confidence that the transition necessary to make sure that the State Department is functional today, and successful with the president who's in office on January 20th, a minute afternoon, will also be successful. I went through a transition on the front, and I've been on the other side of this. I'm very confident that we will do all the things that are necessary to make sure that the government, the United States government, will continue to perform its national security function as we go forward.
Joe Biden's victory has left victims of racism in the United States hoping that the country is now geared towards uprooting systemic racism, discrimination based on race and ethnicity, taking many forms. The US has made progress in eliminating some of the institutional, legalized racial discrimination of past years, such as slavery, but those on the receiving end of this scourge, people of color, African Americans, Latinos, Asians and other minorities, think that much needs still to be done. Spurred by bold, fatal shooting of Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia and the police killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor and other African Americans across the country in recent months, the many injustices against black people have been thrust to the forefront. Is Joe Biden the Messiah? In a victory speech on Saturday night, Biden called it a time to heal in America.
And especially those moments when this campaign was at its lowest ebb, the African-American community stood up again for me. You've always had my back, and I'll have yours.
Well, to get some sense of how serious and entrenched institutional racism is in the US, we're now joined by political commentator and strategist Derek Plummer he's in Washington, D.C., and he joins us via Skype. Derek, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the program once again. Always good to talk to you.
Likewise, Peter. Thank you for having me.
All right, so it's been over a week now. How long is this going to take, do you think, to get some concession or acknowledgement that Joe Biden will be President 46?
Well, listen, I would say that the acknowledgement that he will be the next president is very clear. I think it's even clear to Donald Trump. What I do recognize is that, he was probably never going to concede. He has governed in a way that has been divisive. He's governed in a way that goes against all of our norms. And there is no chance for him to win this election. He lost resoundingly. Nearly 75 million Americans voted for Joe Biden. 4.5 million more voters voted for him than they did for Donald Trump. And so right now, what we are seeing from the president and arguably his GOP enablers is this idea that they don't have to acknowledge the reality. And it's unfortunate, but as you heard in the previous segment, President-elect Biden is moving forward with the work that has to be done. But let's be very clear. What Donald Trump is doing and what he's signaling in terms of what he values as it relates to the American democracy really does demonstrate that he does not, approach or consider or think about our democracy in a way that presidents have generally done that, and arguably someone who's the leader of the free world.
Okay, let's talk about race relations, because Joe Biden would not have gotten to the White House if African Americans and other minorities didn't show up for him in the numbers that they did.
Without question. So when you look at the key battleground states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia even, right? Black voters showed up in numbers significantly higher than they did in 2016. And you have programs run by like the NAACP and other civil society organizations and civil rights groups that were focused on engaging Black voters specifically to ensure that they were educated, engaged, and mobilized this election season. And I think what we've seen in the outcome is, again, when you look at Philadelphia, when you look at the numbers in Wayne County outside of Detroit, when you look at Milwaukee County and the number of Black voters that voted for the Democratic ticket, Georgia, right? Republicans have not lost Georgia since 1992. And here comes Joe Biden winning a very red state, or one that has been red for a considerable amount of time, and one of those states that Democrats thought they could win, but never really have been able to. And the reality is that Black voters actually got Democratic ticket elected, and they cannot deny it, and nor should it be denied.
So what were they voting for exactly?
Yeah, I think what they were voting for were a number of things. One, when you look at the COVID-19 pandemic and how the U.S. has been arguably crippled by it, right? We now just crossed the grim threshold of 240,000 Americans who have now died. You know, disproportionately, those impacted by COVID-19 have been Black Americans. When you look at our healthcare system, those that are disproportionately impacted negatively are Black Americans. When you look at the economy, the highest unemployment numbers are those Black Americans. And it's not just even with COVID. When you look at this president's policies, he has not been a champion for Black Americans. And I think that's how you saw them vote when it came to this particular election. And Joe Biden has a history and a record, having served with President Obama as his vice president, of really, I think, putting the issues that we care about, whether it's civil rights, voting rights, our economic power, et cetera, at the forefront. And I think that's why you saw overwhelmingly 91%, I believe is the number that we're looking at right now, Black Americans voting for Joe Biden.
All right, so health definitely one of them, but we can't ignore that this also came at a time where hashtag Black Lives Matter really gripped the planet, not just America. Does this come with huge expectation for Joe Biden to move significantly forward in dealing with race issues, particularly in systemic racism in places like the police?
Yeah, so, a couple of things I would look at. One, I have to say I was pleasantly surprised to hear him talk about systemic racism in his acceptance speech on Saturday night. That is extremely important. And you just asked the question in terms of why Black Americans voted in overwhelming numbers for him. I would argue, the fact that Donald Trump does not even think systemic racism exists was probably one of those reasons. I would also say that in terms of the challenge in front of President-elect Biden, the Democrats in the House have put forth a police reform bill, a meaningful police reform bill that the GOP Senate essentially ignored. And I think what he's going to have to tackle is, I think there's some things that he can probably do in terms of executive orders, right, related to policing in the U.S. and trying to tackle some of those systemic issues, whether it's in housing, you name it. But it is going to take legislative action for those things to become permanent. And I think that is where the challenge is going to be, because right now you have one party in the U.S. that understands and recognizes the value of voting rights, right? So Democrats have been fighting to ensure that more people have the ability to vote than ever before. And on the other hand, you have the GOP that has fought and continues to fight for full enfranchisement of Black Americans and Brown Americans for their own political interests. And so that's just one of the systemic issues that President Biden will have to confront in terms of trying to move our country forward and really overcome those barriers.
So another interesting anomaly is that President Trump got an increased number of Black voters, we believe particularly Black males. Why did that happen?
Yeah, so look, we're still looking at the exit polling numbers. And so I would just be cautious about what we're seeing related to those numbers, because they are notoriously off when you look at the overarching numbers. When we look at the raw data months from now. What I will say, though, when we look at the raw data in some of those key battleground states, and I mentioned the NAACP earlier, what you saw on the Democratic side wasn't necessarily a national strategy to increase Black turnout, but a strategy to engage Black voters in key states. So again, as I'm sure your viewers know, we have the Electoral College. So you can win the election by 50 million votes nationally, but it doesn't matter if you lose the Electoral College. And so what you saw on the Democratic side was a strategic effort, and I would argue with those advocacy groups, to engage Black voters in those key electoral battleground states of Pennsylvania, of Michigan, of Wisconsin. And what we've seen, based upon the preliminary numbers, is that there has been an actual increase in terms of Black turnout for the Democratic ticket. So, specifically, I believe in Wisconsin, you saw 92% vote for the Democratic ticket compared to, I believe it was 88% previously. In Michigan, in Wayne County, you saw a significant increase in terms of Black turnout from 2016 to 2020. And so I would argue that as we look at those numbers, we should look at it on a state-by-state basis, not necessarily on the national exit polls. Not looking at the, national election poll data.
All right, so high expectations about dealing with race and finding healing in the country. But why should people of color in America be optimistic? It was just the other day that the country had a Black president. Things didn't move significantly forward, or did they?
At this moment, I think back to the quote in words of Dr. King, that the moral arc of the universe is long, and it bends, or the moral arc of the universe is long and it bends towards justice. And what I would say is that this is not something that is going to happen overnight, right? We have been incrementally having tremendous progress over centuries here, right? And earlier in the segment, you talked about moving from slavery to where we are now, right? And when you look at the progress that has been made over the last 50, 60 years, whether it was Jim Crow segregation laws and the inability of Black Americans to actually be able to participate in our democracy, to now we have just elected the first Black woman to the second highest office in the land. And so progress is being made. But I think we also have to recognize that it will take time. Mm-hmm. This is not something that will happen overnight. And what is very unique to the U.S. is our dynamic around race. For sure, there's issues in other countries, right, when it comes to that. But I think the U.S.'s history and even how we kind of operate today, I think is indicative of the challenge that we have to overcome. And so what I mean by that is that there are, while we don't have the laws in the books, we do have to continue to have these battles around voting rights. We continue to have to have these battles around voter enfranchisement. And what we are coming to, and what the power of Black Lives Matter has been in this last few months, has really recognizing the value that Black lives do matter. And it's not a political statement, it's a fact. And so there has been progress, but for sure there's more progress to be made.
All right, so, President Biden will have 4 years to get his shoes on and start skating quite quickly because people can't breathe now. And I don't know if they've got the patience to appreciate the dynamic you've described where things take time.
Yeah. I think back to a moment. I had the pleasure of working for the late, great Congressman John Lewis, icon, civil rights champion. And when I worked for him, what he said to me was, the challenges that your generation will have to face are going to be much more difficult than the ones that my generation had to face. Now, this is John Lewis. He almost lost his life on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. He spoke at the March on Washington. He lost friends, including Dr. King and others, lose their life in this fight. And so when I asked him, how could he say that? He said, well, because the issues that you'll have to confront are going to be covert. You're not going to be able to see the evils of segregation. You're not going to see the segregated water fountains or the dogs being sacked on you. But what you will have to overcome are those glass ceilings that so many people that look like you and I have had to fight through. And again, what I see is the progress that has been made over time. You point to the fact that we have Barack Obama elected as the first black president. That happened in John Lewis's lifetime. Kamala Harris is the first black woman to be elected vice president, the first woman, period. And so progress takes time, but our challenge is to continue to fight because those that come behind us will benefit from it.
All right. Do you think, though, especially when we consider the systemic racism that's so glaring in the police, that the progressives in the Democratic Party will be allowed to push for more change, more significant change, because there's already this pushback, isn't there, that they're saying that the reason why we're struggling in Congress and we might struggle to regain the Senate is some of this language that's been coming through about defunding the police and being too progressive. Might that be a problem for Biden as he tries to tackle particularly a machine such as the police?
You know, listen, the challenges that he's going to have to tackle are going to be considerable. So not only does he have to tackle the Democrat-Republican divide, to your point, there's absolutely a divide in terms of like the progressive wing of the Democratic Party and the moderate wing and the conservative wing. But the reality is that the Democratic Party has, for the most part, in modern history, been a very big tent. And so I think what he's going to have to do is, you know, and we heard him say this during the debates, that he is the leader of the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party's positions are the positions that he lays out. And so will there be some battles? I have no doubt. Right. We saw it during the Obama administration, whether it was with the Affordable Care Act, and you had some that wanted, you know, essentially universal health care versus some that wanted to ensure that we kept the private system in place. And so there's always going to be that challenge for the president of the United States, whether he's the Democrat or she's a Republican, to kind of make sure that you are not allowing your various bases of your party to dictate your agenda. And I have confidence in President-elect Biden that he is going to be the one who's going to set the North Star for the Democratic Party. And by and large, the party is going to get behind him.